Hello everyone and welcome to the Quilt Show. Today's guest got her start in film and television production. Now her primary job is designing fun fabric and patterns. Got color? Stick around, the show is coloricious with lots of colorful quilts. You don't want to miss today. And now, your hosts for the Quilt Show, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Quilt Show. It's a new day like it is every day on the Quilt Show, and it's new because we're on location, and color is the theme of the day.
I know, you just walk and you go, yeah, I'll take some of this home for me. Now we're gonna meet somebody who's been in the industry for 22-ish plus years, okay?
Right.
And you certainly have an eye for color. Please welcome Linda Sullivan.
Thank you for inviting me.
We are so excited to have you here, absolutely. So we're gonna talk about right now, what you're doing right now.
Okay.
Okay, so what are you doing right now?
Well, we are doing contemporary quilts. I love fusible raw edge machine appliques.
Get it done.
Yes, we like to do it fast. We like to do it coloricious, and so we like to do it contemporary. We like to put a little bit of a twist on traditional quilt making, if you will.
And who are we?
We are my husband Carl and I. So we work together as a team. We've been married 32 years. We work together in our company called Colourwerx. So we design all the quilts, we design fabrics, and we also publish a line of best-selling patterns as well.
Let's take a look at some quilts, all right?
Sure.
So we can get an idea, right?
Wow.
Okay.
Quilts again, color right there.
Wow.
Well, this one is called Mod Tiki, and this is the big kahuna version of the Mod Tiki quilt pattern. You can do a single tiki too, but Carl and I are very into the tiki color. We live in Palm Springs, California, where you're inundated by kind of Polynesian bars and tiki culture there. And so
Palm Springs?
Yes, in Palm
did not
Springs.
know that.
Idea.
So we had to do a salute to the tiki culture, and we came up with this little tiki fellow, and he is raw edge machine applique. But this particular quilt is quintessential color work. So what we have is a kind of a whimsical take on applique there, and if you look at the tikis, they're put in color wheel order, which we love to do. So all the tikis are analogous colors put together in color wheel order, and then just take a look at the backgrounds, and those are the complementary colors of what's going on with the tiki too.
Exciting.
Exactly.
So,
There's a lot of thought
and
going
this
into
particular quilt has 12 of my most favorite super saturated colors. So we tend to stick to color wheel order and the saturated colors of the color wheel.
Now, well, can I ask a question here,
Okay,
please?
yeah, sure.
While we're teasing people, these are patterns.
Yes, they are.
Okay,
so all
okay.
of these
Yeah,
have patterns associated
cool.
with them, of course, too.
Now the next one's brightly colored as well.
Look
but
at this,
Yes.
the ladybugs.
It is. It's called Color Bugs. And so this was a salute to Gwen Marston, who I took classes with, and also the Australian quilt artist Jan Mullen, who I used to love. And we had a very close relationship, Jan and I, because we did Quilt Market way back when together, and I used to use a lot of her fabrics. And she did a technique called cut loose quilting, which is where you would slash and sew. And so this is kind of a salute to both Gwen Marston and Jan Mullen with cut loose quilting. And so it's a slash and sew quilt. The color bugs or the ladybugs are meant to be slashed and sewn back together. There's no 1/4-inch seams to follow.
Yay.
There's no exactness that needs to happen. And then there's just a little bit of curved piecing put into that one as well with the leaves. And of course it's Cape Fawcett. So.
Right, and we're going to learn a little bit of that today.
Yes.
So you guys, if you haven't really kind of spread your wings and flew with some no 1/4-inch seams, that's going
Right.
to happen today. The next quilt, which is, I love the design.
Oh,
the,
yes.
The colors are still bright, but they're a little bit more
A
subtle.
little bit more muted. This was made several years ago, and this was kind of a little tribute that Carl and I did to our previous careers in TV and film. We used to work both in the TV and film industries, and we wanted to do some, like a take on that. And what's very funny about this particular quilt, it's called Mod TV, so it is another slash and sew kind of pattern out there where you start with rectangles and squares squares and strips, and you kind of slash them apart and then put things back together without any exact 1/4 inch seams.
And no big fussy templates?
No big fussy templates, nothing. It's anything goes with this.
And I'm going to say Gwen Marston is up above,
Yeah.
smiling down
Well, I
right now.
took a class with her, and it was a great class. So, and the mod TV in particular is fun too, because a lot of people, when we do shows and we're vending at shows, a lot of the younger generation will walk by the booth and notice the mod TV quilt, and then you'll hear this whisper all of a sudden to their grandmother or mother.
Right.
What is that?
Yeah,
What are
is
those
that?
things above the TV? You know, and then they learn, oh, TVs used to have antennas. Oh, TVs used to be on feet. You know?
That is
All right. The next quilt
fabulous.
is also, it's whimsical and colorful. I just love these designs.
Yeah, this one is called Mod Squad, and this is our most current quilt pattern out. And this was a tribute to the 60s, 70s, early 80s culture. Carl and I are really into that. We are into the mid-century modern, living in Palm Springs, and also saluting our kind of late 60s, 70s culture. And so each one of these characters, you'll probably recognize them in some form of popular culture.
But the crazy thing is what goes around comes
I know.
around.
That's
Exactly,
right.
exactly.
No, absolutely. And this is one of the fabric lines that we just released with Island Batiks too,
Oh,
in their
that's
digital
fabulous.
company. So that's called Mod Squad.
I want to go back to, you said you're in
Yeah.
the industry. Let's
Yes.
talk about that.
And the TV.
And the
Oh, the
TV,
TV
yeah.
industry. Yes. Well, our previous careers before we started doing quilting full time was in TV and film. So Carl used to do art production, art direction for TV shows and things of that. And then I used to do production management for Walt Disney Imagineering and
And where was
Universal
this
Studios.
happening, eh?
All in California. So
Okay.
we're Southern California natives.
Okay.
And I want to say this on behalf of Carl, is that he was involved with the Carol Duvall show. And I know
Yes.
a lot of
Oh,
people
okay.
here, he was a set designer, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, she's Mary Dam.
And then you were with Disney.
I was with Disney now, and I didn't do anything. So everybody always thinks, oh, well, you were with Disney, so that's where you got all these creative characters and whimsical touches you're doing with your designs. Nope, I was totally in the production management side of things in the entertainment division of Disney. So what my job was very dry. It was budgeting, 5-year plans, that kind of thing.
But this is the beautiful part of it. Because of that box that you were in, you decided I needed a creative outlet.
did,
and so
yeah.
now we're going to get to talk about your first quilt.
Yes, yeah. So we can look at the first quilt here. Oh,
Oh, that's kind of opposite.
wow. Okay, so look at that quilt. So this was in 1999, and I wanted a creative outlet for myself because, you know, of course, I'm doing this very dry work at Disney, and I just felt like I needed to do something. And it was at the local quilt store. I think we all start there. We take
Sure.
a beginning
Right,
class at our
which
local
is
quilt
smart.
store. It was we used Judy Hopkins around the block.
Yes.
Oh,
quilt,
yeah,
remember that?
sure.
And I loved it. I was called an overachiever by my teacher because, you know, we would be sent home to do 1 block or 2 blocks, and I would come back with 6 or 7 blocks done. But what's interesting about this quilt is this is where all the fabric was in 1999. It was
yeah.
yellow tones and kind of brownish tones. Debbie Mum was really popular. Thimbleberries was very popular.
Exactly.
So I wanted to make, I was really happy that I had finished that quilt, but I wanted to make a second quilt, but I wanted it to be kind of different.
So let's look at this
Yeah,
one. 'cause
so
this,
here
you're
comes
going,
the second
so and
quilt.
how does that happen? Where did you, what?
Okay.
Yeah, before we see it, what did
All
you
right.
do?
So basically what I did is I wanted to do a second quilt. I went back to the quilt store. Couldn't find any fabric I liked because they were pretty traditional.
Right, right.
So Road to California, which is the Road to California Quilters Conference, was coming up in a few months. And I thought, I'm going to take a class. And I looked down the class catalog. And I thought, this lady with these red glasses
You know where she's
looks
going
so
with this?
interesting. And I ended up taking a class with Freddie Moran. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I walked into class with my little bundle of Debbie Mum fabrics and some other whimsical things I had picked up. Freddie looked at me and said, no. And she sent me down to her favorite vendor on the show floor. And at lunch hour, I think I spent $500.
Of course.
Perfect.
Of course, restocking myself into beautiful, bright colors. And most of them were Jan Mullen. That's where I discovered Jan Mullen, the
Okay.
Australian sort. But that is the second quilt. And I got a Jan Mullen pattern. I went home, and I quickly built that quilt. So you can see the difference between first
That's a
Right,
flip-flop,
and
a
second
big
quilt.
Right.
Big
flip-flop.
flip-flop. So, but I knew I had found really what turned me on about quilting, because at that point it was like, oh, this is liberated. I'm wonky housing, wonky cutting. So I set out to do a third quilt. Went back to my
And
quilt
that's this
store.
one.
Yep.
That is this one we're
Okay.
looking at, which is called My Kingdom for a Toad. Originally, this was called. And I basically designed this at home. I couldn't find a pattern I liked, so I took all my fabulous colored fabrics that I had found from Freddie's class and built this quilt. And when I went back to the quilt shop to get a backing fabric, they wanted the pattern.
Oh, that's
Perfect.
awesome.
So
Perfect,
I
perfect.
ended up writing the pattern, and it launched our first company, which was Lindarella's QUILTworks.
Okay.
And that pattern to this date has sold over 75,000 copies.
Oh my gosh, that's
Yeah,
fabulous.
they just loved
That's
it.
Fabulous.
It just took right off.
That's fabulous. Well, we know that your journey took you to North Carolina. You had
Yeah.
a quilt shop. You're back in California
That's
now,
right.
and you're still doing what you love to do.
Absolutely.
I'm pretty excited about what we're going to learn next.
Well, yeah, no kidding. And I'm up with you first, and
Okay.
you're gonna cut me loose, huh?
We're going to do wonky piecing.
Yep, and you also love that machine applique.
Yes,
So
raw edge machine
I
applique.
can't wait.
I like hanging with this person right now.
We'll have some fun when we come back.
Okay, Linda, wonky piecing.
Wonky piecing. Well, wonky piecing is my way of doing liberated piecing of strips of fabric. No 1/4-inch seams are needed. You just cut and slash and sew these strips together. But before we start, I wanted to show you this quilt
Sure,
back here.
sure.
So this was Carl and mine's first exploration into wonky piecing. It's called Dazzle, and it's really more of an exhibition quilt right now. But really what we did is we wanted to create this large scale kind of mosaic-like botanical, organic dragonfly. And it's based, the inspiration for it is based on a botanical print we had in our home in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And so when we first designed it, we basically took a K Fawcett fabric that we thought would work, one of them, which was
Right.
a bluish green, and we made this huge dragonfly. And he has about a 5.5-foot wingspan. And we made the dragonfly, we laid it out on the floor, and we stood back and went, that is flat, that's not lively. So we gathered every single K Fawcett fabric we had, we slashed a strip off each one of them, put them all back together in a kind of skewed format,
Okay.
made the dragonfly again, and it took off, as you can see. And so the body itself is also slashed and sewed together, and it's also raw edge applique on that one.
And this is also a wonky piece.
It is. This is called Cosmos, and this was our first pattern with Colourwerx Designs, and we really wanted to make more of a contemporary, Carl calls it a manly quilt, basically. And it's based on the Drunkard's Path block, and so it's basically slashed and sew
Right,
strips together,
right.
and you make your traditional Drunkard's Path block. Now, we happen to do things on a very much larger scale. Normal Drunkard's Path blocks are about 7 inches by 7 inches. And
No,
then
but that's
put them
a
together.
beauty because
But
you can
this is-
see the fabric.
Absolutely. And what happens is when you slash and sew strips together with wonky piecing, you get basically a new piece of fabric.
Right. And so here it's a little more defined because you've done the rainbow.
Yes, and so this is what I'm going to show you today. So this is what I call the wonky pieced building block, and I'm going to show you how to do that and get started. What's great about this technique is, especially with the pandemic, a lot of us couldn't get out to our quilt shop, a lot of us had to use what we had at home in our stash, and this actually does the trick. You can use
I
orphan
love
jelly
that.
rolls,
Yep.
you can use what's in your stash, and so let's start. Let me show you how you make this.
I mean, basically, you're making a new piece of cloth
You are.
that you're going to play with.
So basically what I have here is a bunch of strips from my stash, and I've cut these at 2.5 inches wide.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can cut them at whatever width you want. If you could only get a 1.5 inch width out of your
Mm-hmm.
stash, that's great. If you want to cut them at 3 inches wide, you can do that.
well, could you not do some at 3, some at 2.5?
You could,
You know, whatever.
You could even piece 2 pieces together
Sure.
if you didn't get enough of what you wanted. So what I've got here is about 9 of these strips, and they're about 14 inches long. So if you're dealing with orphaned jelly roll strips, let's say you have a bunch of jelly roll strips left over from other
Sure.
projects, you can cut 3 strips from each one of those 42-inch long strips.
Right.
And you want them anywhere, like I said, 1.5 to 2 to 2.5 inches to 3 inches wide. And I'm just laying them out here on the board here on a pleasing manner. There's no right or wrong here. You just lay out your strips in a pleasing order. And we're going to start with the bottom 2. So I'm just going to, I always do everything color wheel order. It makes me happy.
Right.
And you know, I just love color wheel order. So here I'm going to start with the yellow and the orange strips.
Okay.
And there's no templates, no wedge rulers that you need. You don't need anything special. You just need your sewing machine and a cutting ruler and a rotary cutter and
Okay.
a mat. And your strips. And I'm going to lay these strips right sides together. And you can see what I've done here is I've skewed, S-K-E-W, skewed these from upper left to bottom right. Now, if I wanted to start and skew them from upper right to bottom left, I could.
Doesn't matter,
Doesn't
right?
matter. So I'm just going to skew it like that. That looks good to me. I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to just sew a straight stitch.
Okay.
I'm going to speed it up just a bit. I don't even have to be perfect with my 1/4 inch seam. I'm not worried about that. I'm only worried about sewing a straight line. So if I needed to draw the line to do sew a straight line, I could do that too. I could just drop my
you
ruler.
people can do that.
Right.
I know you can.
Right. And so there we go. Let's see. Cutter.
There we go.
So what I need to do once I do that first stitch is I now need to cut away the excess fabric that is above here. So I'm just
and I'm going to point out here, this is not a 1/4 inch, and it does
no,
not matter.
It does not matter.
matter.
I'm looking for my rotor.
Right
there.
there.
Okay, so I'm just going to move this like this so I don't cut through anything on the board. I'm just
Or the quilt.
The quilt. And I'm going to cut away the excess fabric there. Oops.
Does that just go bye-bye then?
Yeah, this is just scraps or bye-bye.
Okay.
And then I would take this over to my iron and I would press up. And you can see I've got something that is wonky and skewed already and ready for my third strip.
So let me guess. If this one's going this way, then this one's going to go this way.
Right, and if you want to, some people get a little mixed up which way to alternate the skewing.
Does it really matter?
Well, you do want to alternate the skew from right to left. Why? Because if you start adding strip upon strip,
you're going to end up with a,
it's going to, I call it banana boating. It's going to banana boat out this way, and it won't become really a nice, usable piece of building block, wonky piece building block. So you can audition it too. That's what I do. I audition the skew, and then I just flip it right sides together. And again, go back to the machine and sew your best straight stitch.
So if a person were thinking, when they got a piece of fabric, they would just cut off a 2.5 inch strip and put it away, maybe by colors or something like that.
They could, or a lot of people just keep a scrap bag of extra. Maybe you're down to your last 1/8 of a yard or 1/6 of a yard, and so you just put it in a scrap bag and basically cut your strip from it.
Okay.
All right, so now we have 3 strips together. Let me cut away the leader piece and cut away that. And again, I would cut away the excess on top to reduce the bulk only. I mean, if you forget to do it, it's not a great thing. It's not horrible. And now we've got 3 strips together. And so I would just go on and go forth and add the 4th strip, the 5th strip, the 6th strip, the 7th strip,
so this
until
is
I build to, wait,
this.
I'm coming back to this.
Oh, sorry.
Building
yeah,
that.
because it's ratty on the outside edge.
And you can see I'm not worried about matching up the sides at all. What I've done is just create what I call the basic wonky piece building block. And from that, I can go ahead and use, I don't know, my Drunkard's Path template. This is the template for Cosmos, one of our patterns. And I could cut the quadrant from this and create the quilt that's behind me or this one over here. I could appliqué with this, which was what we're going to talk about in the next segment.
Okay.
Right? I could make a border from this. This is what I like to do. So I'll cut this in half. Let me just divide it in half just like so. And I could even up either edge, right? And cut my border strips to whatever size they need to be. So this one is cut at about 6.5 inches, right? But if I wanted it to be only a 3-inch border strip, I could just cut that in half.
And so I know you said it, but say it again. What kind of the size you want to start with?
Well,
with the strips?
You want to start with about 14 inches long. That's that's pretty much creates a nice usable piece for me, especially when you're appliquing shapes and things like that. The other thing you can do with your wonky piece building block is you can make several of these, like, 24, whatever you want, square them down to 12 inches by 12 inches and start to put together a quilt. And as long as everybody is squared down to a common denominator, you're good to go. That's really where it is. So you don't have to measure anything while you're building it. You just square down when you're done.
Okay.
So the next thing I want to show you is what happens if you don't have any jelly roll strips, let's say, and you only have orphaned layer cakes or 5-inch squares. Maybe you've got a charm pack hanging around.
This is charm, right?
Yeah, this is charm. So let me bring these over here and I'll show you first. We'll just move that out of the way. I'll show you first this table runner. So I made this table runner for our house, which is basically out of orphaned layer cake. So I had a whole bunch of orphaned Kona cotton 10-inch squares. Aren't they gorgeous? But I had not enough to really do anything with it, but I could make a table runner and I could wonky piece it. And this literally took, a matter of an afternoon to make, literally. So all I did was I took my 10-inch squares and I kind of put them in color families and I put 3 squares together. So here I've got
What do you mean three?
Like
three
three
colors?
tonal
Okay,
tonal colors
gotcha,
together. So here
gotcha.
I've got like 3 greens
Okay.
together. And what I did is I just basically cut these into 5-inch squares. So this is if you have a 10-inch square at home, but
This is layer cakes, right?
this is a layer cake.
Yeah.
So it's a 10-inch square. And I'm going to cut basically this into 4 5-inch squares or thereabouts. And what I did, oh my goodness.
Blade time.
I know, sorry. Okay, so what I did is I'll start with this, and I just took a stack of 5-inch squares. So if you've got a charm pack at home, you can do the same thing. Just put them together in color families.
Okay, okay.
Doesn't have to be a 10-inch square. And I'm gonna make this into 3 strips. So basically, 5-inch divided by 3 is about 1 3/4. So I'm just gonna do that. 1, 2, 3, right? So now I've just got my little strips that are about 5 inches wide. And I'm just going to start that wonky piecing journey again. So again, I just took 2 strips, skewed them, the S-K-E-W, I always say that, from upper left to bottom right. I would sew across like I did and cut away the excess and press that seam upward.
Same
right?
thing.
2. Then I would take a next strip and I would skew it, audition it, skew it the opposite direction and build my wonky piece square, which would eventually look like that. And so for this table runner, I put about 5 strips together.
Okay.
And then I would square this down to a common denominator.
Yeah.
So you have to have a kind of a plan of what you want. If you're making a pillow, you might have to back yourself into that measurement.
This is like total playtime.
Totally playtime.
Yeah.
And it's anything goes. You
Yeah.
can do anything you want with these. I mean, so if I squared this down, which I did here, to a 4.5-inch by 4.5-inch square, I end up with a bunch of squares that look like this once I put all my color families together. And I can start to put them together to make the table runner.
I love this.
But let's say you want to make something bigger.
Okay.
Let's say you have 10-inch squares around and you want to use them up, but maybe this is a little too fussy for you or too small.
I'm thinking even going
you know.
smaller, okay?
Oh, yeah, you could. You absolutely could. But let me move these away, and I've got some 10-inch squares that I did exactly the same thing to. So these were made from a layer cake divided by 3. So I put 3 colors together. I cut that layer cake into 3 strips,
Okay.
and then I pieced them together wonky piece, and now I can make, and I squared them all down to a common denominator, which was 9 inches by 9 inches. So I find that whatever you use starting with, let's say you start with a 5-inch square, you could probably get a 4-inch square by the time you square it down.
Okay,
If
cool.
you start with a 10-inch square, you can probably get a 9-inch
A 9
square
inch. So
out of
figure
it.
there's an inch of waist.
Right, right. And so you can start to have a really fast, let me just put these like
beautiful,
this. Whatever
beautiful.
way you want to rotate them, right?
Now, do you demo this stuff at shows when you go to shows?
I do sometimes, and I demo them on our our little Fab Friday program we have
What's
on our
that?
face. It's a little program that Carl and I do once a month at the end of the month called Fab Friday.
Okay.
And it's a live stream to Facebook, and we put tutorials on it. And Carl, believe it or not, actually does tutorials as well. So
And where does somebody find this?
on our Colourwerx Facebook page.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So here's the other thing you can do. So let's say you want to do a huge lap quilt or a pillow
Sure.
just like that. Well, you could also, I just want to put this in. You
Okay.
could take the smaller ones, dun, dun, dun,
Okay.
and put these in as a little 4-patch here and really mix it up like that.
You could get
too.
something fairly
So-
sophisticated going on here.
You
Big
could.
time.
You could, and it could look artsy without any trouble whatsoever. You don't have to have an art background to do this. Like I said, you don't have to do perfect 1/4-inch piecing to do this. You don't need a wedge template to do this or any of that stuff. You just need a sharp rotary cutter and a rotary ruler and whatever you've got in your stash.
Okay, it's time for you to go home because I need to sew.
Okay.
No. Listen, up next, it's going to be applique using wonky fabric. You're going to want to see this. Stick around.
Welcome back. Sometimes I feel like a broken record because quilting is so diverse. There's so much that we can do. I love what you're doing, and this is going to be so accessible to so many people.
It is. I love to teach easy machine applique, and I'm a big believer that no matter what machine you have, whether it be the highest end machine or something you bought at a big box store because you're beginning, you can do a beautiful applique stitch.
Absolutely. And I want to take a look at the applique because we did the building blocks in the previous segment, but you're using those same types of of piecing
Yes.
to do for this wonderful
It is.
applique that we see.
I love to take my Wonky piece building block, and I have one right here
All right.
underneath all of this.
This is folded back
Right here.
open.
So this is what we talked about in the first segment, and I love to use this to cut appliques from. So you can see it on the Mod Dog here and the Mod Cat that's just Wonky piecing, and I've cut all my appliques from them. You can cut flowers from these, vases, any shape you want.
Sure. All right, so before we go into the process, you said there's a lot of little tools, things that you need for your toolbox so that you can do the
Yep.
job.
Well, if you've never appliqued before, or you're looking to, refine your applique skills, these are my favorite tools that I like to use, and I always recommend them in each class that I teach. The very first one is the open toe presser foot. That is really, really important. And why is that important? Because a lot of times people try to get away using their all-purpose presser foot, but you can't see the road ahead of you when you use it.
I agree.
And it also has that groove in the bottom that allows you to do a closer zigzag stitch, which is essentially a satin stitch.
Yes.
And that groove in the bottom will allow the satin stitch to go underneath the foot without getting caught up.
I agree wholeheartedly. We are in accord.
Yep, and no
that.
matter if you bought a lower end machine, you can get an open toe foot. A lot of people think they can't. You can find one.
Sure.
The other thing that I like to get is a pair of super sharp to the tip scissors. And these are two of my favorite brands. Karen K. Buckley, of course, 4-inch serrated edge scissors are great. This is to cut your appliques. And then the Olfa precision tips are wonderful. So I just go between the two depending on what I need. The other thing is needles.
What's the advantage of those, really?
Oh, well, the serrated actually grips the edge of the fabric, so it allows you to be a lot more accurate with your cutting of curves. It'll grip and it will move along the fabric. The precision Olfas are just really smooth to cut with.
And why not bigger scissors?
Oh, well, you can't do small curves with your 8-inch dressmakers. It's just
Okay.
it's like cutting paper dolls. You just cannot
You've
do
got
it.
to use the right tool to do the job.
That's right. And if you're doing small little berries and things like that, it's much better to have a sharper, smaller pair of scissors. The other thing I like and get asked questions about is what needle do I use in my machine for machine applique? And I use the Schmetz Microtex 9014. Now you could use any size 9014 and any size super sharp to the tip needles that you might like for your machine, but I like the 9014 size because it really allows me to change whatever thread I'm using without having to change the needle.
Sure, and a lot of people might say, but it makes big holes.
No.
They heal. They really do.
They do.
heal.
With a little mist of water, they'll heal, absolutely. And thread is a big component, of course, to machine applique.
What are these threads?
These are Aurifil 40 weight, which are like a top stitching thread, but I like to use them for applique.
Okay.
And the 40 weight is just a little bit thicker than 50 weight.
And
So-
I do like 40 weight as well, but have you found your formula with 40 weight, or do you sometimes use a 50 or
Oh,
sometimes
no, I do.
use...
I switch around between 50 weight, 40 weight, clear. Sometimes I'll use a 12 weight or 28 weight. It just kind of depends on my mood that day.
Okay, and,
what I want.
we'll get to that in just
Yes.
a second, right? All right,
Yes.
so what's the
The
fray
other thing
check?
is fray check is there in case you are using the secure stitch on your machine, or let's say you don't have a secure stitch function on your machine. You're going to need to bring those threads to the back to knot them eventually to secure your applique stitch. And a lot of times that knot may come loose a little bit, or you may not feel totally secure about it. It may not look secure, so
Right.
I just drop a fray check.
Tiniest
Tiny
drop is all it takes.
Yeah, tiny drop, and it will go clear, and it won't distress the fabric at all. A glue stick is important because when you're using fusible web, adhesive fusible web, there are times that maybe the fusible web has gone off a little bit, or you've overheated it, and you may find the edge of the applique lifting off your background fabric. So just keep a glue stick handy, or the appliqué Elmer's glue, and you can just put a dot behind the applique. The last thing you want is your applique moving on you as you're trying to stitch around.
Right, and ultimately, once it's down, once you've stitched it down, you're not so concerned about
No.
the fusible anymore. You're stitching it down.
Right, but you do want it secure because
Yeah.
you don't want it moving under your needle.
And so your fusibles?
Fusible web, I like the Heat and Bond Light, and it's important that it says light, because if you use regular Heat and Bond or regular unlight, it's almost like armor. But this way I can put several appliques on top of each other without cutting out the center of the fusible
Okay.
web. And they don't feel stiff or like armor.
All right.
And I like the Heat and Bond brand only because it's reliable. The release paper releases when you want it to release. you know, it doesn't come off when before that.
And what are you using Sulky
Okay,
Totally
so
Stable for?
Sulky Totally Stable iron-on tearaway stabilizer is very important. I find a lot of people when they start appliquing, especially when they do a zigzag stitch or a decorative stitch perhaps, they don't put a stabilizer behind their background fabric. And it's important that you do that because that will help lift the stitches slightly up off the background fabric. And when you try to do a satin stitch that may be very close together,
it's like it's trying to punch
it creates a caterpillar, like a tunneling.
Mm-hmm.
And so the stabilizer just simply helps you to
Keeps it
avoid
flat.
keeps everything. It does a beautiful stitch. But you can use any tearaway stabilizer. I just happen to like that
Okay,
one.
there's a lot of information here. Let's talk about the threads and the different looks that you get from those threads. Let's start wherever you want to start.
Well,
I'm
let's
just gonna
start with this
separate
one
them.
here.
Okay.
So a lot of people discount clear thread to use around their raw edge fusible machine applique. I don't. I love it. And I use a little tiny blind hem stitch. I might even use a tinier blind hem stitch than you see right there.
I love that.
But for the cameras, we want you to be able to see that stitch.
That looks
And what's
gorgeous.
great about the clear thread around your applique is by the time you quilt the piece, it almost looks like needle turn applique, and it's still raw edge.
Yes.
And also, the clear thread hides all your mistakes.
Yeah,
it's great for beginners.
It's great for
And
beginners.
I prefer the superior thread, clear thread, because it's polyester. So if you hit it with an iron, it's not going to melt under your iron, which is important.
All right, so the King Tut.
King Tut variegated. This is good. This goes for any variegated thread. I like to show people what the variegated thread looks like with a zigzag. Now, I primarily do mostly zigzag around my appliques. I just think it's more of a contemporary look.
Right.
Although you can do a buttonhole stitch
Sure,
or things
sure.
like that. But when you use variegated around your applique with a zigzag, you can see right away what that does. It creates bands of color. And you may or may not like that. So it's
Yes.
just important to know what it looks like.
Yeah, don't get into the. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to say make samples.
Yes.
If you make a sample of what you
Test.
like before you go to your
Test,
master
test,
project,
test.
it's a lot better.
Well, we're going to talk about testing in just a minute, how important that is.
Let's talk about these thread weights.
Okay, I like to show this too. This is just a stitch out of some petals, and what I did is I used the exact same stitch width and length on each one of these petals. There is no difference between the stitch, the width, or the length. The only difference is the thread weight.
Okay,
And you can
there's-
see with the 50 weight thread that just creates a delicate buttonhole or applique stitch around the shape. Go to a 40 weight, that's a top stitch thread, and you're getting a little heavier look there, which
is
I
your,
like.
your go-to. It's
I
your
like
go-to,
it.
right?
Now the 12 weight or 28 weight will emulate basically hand stitching or
Like
hand
almost with
applique.
embroidery floss.
Or
I
pearl,
mean,
or pearl cotton. And so if you're looking to do that, if you really want to, which I do, I like to try to emulate needle turn applique because I can't do it. I break out into a cold sweat. And I also do it with wool. So I'll use the 12 weight or the 28 weight with wool, or sometimes I use minky to applique
Sure,
with,
yeah.
furry minky. You sometimes need a thicker thread to come across all that.
All right, so where do we want to go next? Do we want to go here or
Yeah.
do we want to go to the stitching?
We'll go here to the,
All right.
okay, so we have our Wonky building block, and I wanted to go through the steps of raw edge fusible applique
Okay.
first, and how you set up your applique. So if you've got your Wonky building block done, right, you're going to want to take your fusible web, and we're looking at the mini mod dog here.
Okay.
So this is a little dog pattern that we have, and we have the pillow off to the side there as well.
Okay.
And you're going to want to draw your shapes on the smooth size of the fusible web,
And I
not
can
the
feel
rough
that,
side.
yeah, so this is the
That's
fusible.
the part that will fuse to your iron. You don't want to do that. And I always use a number 2 pencil. It's important. Try not to use a pen or Sharpie because sometimes if you hit that with fray check, it will bleed into your fabric. I learned
Okay.
that the hard way.
Okay, all right.
And the other thing important about that is to trace all your shapes separately from each other.
Okay.
You know, they have to be. So here we have a rough cut of our dog, and you want to rough cut it out. So notice I didn't cut him right out on the line. I cut him about a ½ inch away from the line that I drew.
Okay. And where
Okay.
does he go?
So he then gets ironed onto our Wonky
Okay.
building block. And you can see you can choose between which way you want the strips to move with the Wonky building block.
Oh, you see, you could really kind of go any way
So,
you want.
Yeah, so if you
Yeah.
want them to move horizontally, then you would place your dog horizontally. The other thing to know with raw edge fusible machine applique is every shape that you create will be in reverse
Right.
when you cut it out. So if you're doing initials for a baby bib, and you're going to put an L there or an R,
Right.
you need to make sure that the R and the L are in reverse.
because
they're
yeah.
going to come out that way.
Yeah, because
so when I
this
cut
dog's facing this way, it's going to be
that
this way.
And so when I cut this little dog out, and you can see he's been cut out, and this is where you want to take your time. So this
Right.
is where those 4-inch precision Sharp to the tip scissors
Okay.
come in handy
Very
because you have
good.
to go around all these curves, and this is your final shape. So once you get your final shape, you're going to remove the release paper.
That's this.
Yes, and you can score that with a pin.
You're right.
And just be, be wary and be noticeable that you've got the release paper off, so don't hit it with an iron because you'll be cleaning your
Okay,
iron and all
sure,
that stuff.
sure, sure.
And then you would just fuse it to your background fabric. And if you notice with this little guy, I've got his little second ear already on here and appliqué on.
Okay.
And the reason I did that is I want to talk about this for a minute, because that ear goes underneath the main ear.
Right.
And so any shapes that are overlapped by other shapes need a little 1/4-inch seam allowance
Added to
them, unless the pattern designer has already added that
Sure,
for you. And it's usually
sure.
a dotted line.
Right.
And then you would applique shape those shapes first. So the shapes that are closest to the background fabric get appliqued first.
Okay.
And that's what this is kind of showing you, that I went around with gold thread. And then I would come around and stitch him all the way around. I've also got stabilizer, very important. Again, I can't stress this enough. If you're not already pre-quilted your background, which we'll talk about in the next segment, you need to put stabilizer back there if you're doing a zigzag stitch or decorative stitch.
Right.
If you're doing a buttonhole stitch, you don't really need the stabilizer, and sometimes when you do put stabilizer on, you might tear your buttonhole stitch if you're a little too aggressive, tearing away the stabilizer.
We've got a little bit of time left, so I'd love for you to show us a little
Okay.
bit of going around the
I
shapes
would.
with your stitch.
I'm a big believer in testing. So I don't ever take my machine for granted. I don't care if I left it the night before.
Right.
You've got to test. And the test that I like to do is, I actually like the moon and star shapes for testing. Why? Because they give me inner curves, outer curves, points, and it just gets me going
Very good.
for the day. I
Okay.
can test my stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I've got the machine set to a zigzag stitch, which is the number 2 on this particular machine. I'm just going to start stitching. I want to see what the stitch does and how wide it is and what it's doing. That's a bit too wide for me.
Okay, yeah,
I need the
yeah.
needle down, so I want to make sure I've engaged the needle down so that the needle stops down in the fabric. That's important.
Okay.
And I'm just going to adjust my stitch width down to about 3. This is my kind of go-to zigzag.
So a 3.0 wide.
3.0 wide, 0.9 together. You
Okay.
can go closer if you want, but
Okay.
I kind of like that look, especially when I'm trying to be easygoing about it, basically. And so once I decide what I like, I'm just going to lift this out, bring
Yeah, cut the thread.
cut the threads, and I'm going to show you how to do this. So I
Okay.
like to show people how to start and stop. If you have a secure stitch function on your machine, which is usually designated by a little dot or
Right,
something like
right,
that,
or a little notch
you
or
can use it.
something.
It's fine to use it. It will hold your stitch in place, I have found. Let me just make sure. Sorry, I need to just
It's
so that
okay.
I'm
I
over
can-
the other side. I always
right.
like to start on the right-hand side
Okay.
of so I'm starting on the outer edge of the applique. And I'm going to drop my needle down.
And you're hand turning that down.
I'm hand turning, yeah.
Okay.
Or you can use the needle down function. But I'm just going to take one stitch in place. And there it is.
And
Can
then
everybody see that? I just brought up the bobbin thread.
It's a
And the reason I do that, I'm bringing my
There it
tweezers
is.
up.
Yep, yep.
So that's another tool I use, is a pair of eyebrow tweezers, because those are very handy for grabbing your thread. And so I'm going to take my needle and put it straight back down in that hole. And the reason I'm bringing up the bobbin thread is it avoids thread nests in the back, basically. So I'm just holding on to those. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to start on the outer edge of the applique, which is right here.
right.
And I'm just going to start stitching. Now, it's going to take 3 stitches in place. So if you have a secure stitch function, you're going to want to engage that,
Okay.
let it secure the stitch. If you don't, just hold on to these threads, and you know you're going to need to take the threads to the back to knot them.
Okay.
All right, so now I'm going to start stitching. So it's securing, and I'm stitching my zigzag. And what I'm doing is I'm actually not looking at the needle. We don't want to get hypnotized by the needle. I'm actually looking right in front of the needle, and I want to make sure that I'm zigging to the outside edge of the applique and then zagging, if you will, to the
Right.
inside edge. So I'm coming around on this particular curve. Now, if I feel like I'm going to run off the road, which means run off the applique,
Right.
I need to stop and pivot, which means lift my presser foot and pivot the applique
I get it. Yes. Mhm.
to adjust myself because I'm on an outside curve. So we're gonna stop and pivot on the outside edge.
I find that there are times when you can go rather quickly, but other times when you got to kind of slow down, take a
Yes.
breath, because it's getting a bit out of control
Yeah.
and get things back into place.
So now we're approaching this
Yeah,
point.
the point.
So everybody wants to know, how do I do points? I'm just gonna cut that thread out of the way. There. I do what I call a lazy man's point, okay? And what that means is I'm gonna stitch all the way out to the point. I'm not gonna adjust my stitch width or length. Some people can dial down as they do this. I cannot.
Okay.
Where you're looking at the machine and dialing
And
down.
you stopped with the needle on
So
the right.
I stopped with the needle on the right, and I'm gonna take and pivot my whole applique sandwich, if you will, the piece. So I'm perpendicular. And I'm gonna take 1, maybe 2, depending on the width.
Okay.
So I get on the other side.
Sure. and
Now-
you're on the right side again.
Yeah, now I'm ready to go up this other edge. And this is considered an inside curve.
Right.
So because it's an inside curve, I want to stop and pivot on the inside edge of the applique, which is
Okay.
the actual applique.
Sure.
So I'm just going to stop and pivot when I feel like I'm out of control.
Right.
If I don't feel like I'm out of control, I can just, like you said, put
You can
pedal to the
scooch, but
metal.
even so, I think you have to slow down a little bit.
And you get used to this. The more you practice, the more you can just go right up.
All right, you guys, you can do this, and I want to take a look at the pillow here. This wonderful little
That's
puppy
our
dog.
mini
Yeah,
dog.
it's really great.
Yes, he was actually designed after our beagle, Molly, who was
Okay.
our office manager.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of these tips with us. I just love it, and you're not done.
No, we're going to do decorative stitches next.
That's right. We're going to do decorative stitches, taking it to another level with the quilting. Is
yes.
that right?
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
We'll do that when we come back.
On the next quilt show, her modern designs are bold, geometric, and simply wonderful.
Meet Heather Black and learn the basics of curved piecing.
Plus, she has practical design tips you will not want to miss.
That's why I pick a theme when I'm designing, because then you want to pick design elements that support that theme. And the more design elements you can use to communicate those themes, the more straightforward it's going to be at the end.
Then go home with the legendary ladies of the International Quilt Festival, Carrie Patterson Bresenhan and Nancy O'Brien Puentes.
You learn to take real pretty little stitches here because you're going to wake up every morning of your life and have to look at them.
These visionary cousins have created one of the most quintessential quilt shows in the entire world. Hear their story.
Inspiration, ideas, and ingenuity right before your very eyes here on The Quilt Show.
So Linda, you have a really high-end Bernina, and a lot of us have high-end sewing machines.
Right.
And
Well, it was one day in my sewing room and I was appliquing and I thought, I really want something a little bit different for my applique shape. And I thought, I have got about 1,200 decorative stitches on my machine. Why don't I just start using them around the edge of the applique? And I really liked the result. It was kind of an aha moment because one, it was a lot easier to do a decorative stitch, and you do need to fiddle around with the stitch width and length. Not every single one is going to look perfect, but I just love the way it looks. It embellishes, it kind of texturizes the edge of your applique shapes. And we can look down here at this stitch out.
I think this is amazing.
Yeah, this is just something I did on my Bernina one afternoon with my little petal shape. And I thought, I'm just going to stitch out my favorite decorative stitches. And I want to see what they look like, what stitch width, what stitch length works best. And I just fooled around playing with the decorative stitches and just went to town and decided to do a stitch sampler. And you can see they're all wonderful ways of texturizing the edges of applique.
Okay, so I'm gonna point this out here. So this is the satin stitch.
And the zigzag stitch.
Oh, that's what I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
the zigzag. And it's all right here with this guy.
Yep.
But then you've fiddled with it, and then you've marked it, and that's
Yes, and I brought a little
brilliant.
mark because that's important when you're looking at what you want to do for future stuff. You don't have to start the whole thing over again. And then this is the buttonhole stitch. So I just like to see what it looks like. It's very small and then larger. And this is one of my favorite
I was
stitches.
just going to ask, what's your fave?
This is my favorite one. Now this is 603 on the Bernina 750, which is
Okay.
what I have. But what I love about this stitch is it tingles the applique, if I can say it like that. It looks like the shape or the petal or the flower petal is like tingling or on fire. It's great for like cactus, if you're trying to do prickly pricks or on a cactus
I
and
love
make it look
that
different.
idea. Yeah.
And depending on what thread color you use, I usually use the same color thread as my applique or a little tone down or tone up, just to highlight the outline. Now here I've used gold because that's what I had around sitting in the machine that day. But you can see how it changes, and you can just go from stitch to stitch.
And then let's look over here, because now is it always successful, or sometimes you go,
No, not always. You have to really test the decorative stitches.
Okay.
There are some decorative stitches that just simply really just don't work. The other thing you have to look at too with the decorative stitches, do you want to take the time, do you have the time for it to stitch out? Some decorative stitches, take a long time to go to do their cycle, if you will, from beginning to end.
And you know what I learned from Ricky? Let's go back to blanket stitch. If you do a single blanket stitch and it takes 1 minute,
Yes.
if you do a double, it takes 3 minutes.
Right.
So yeah, time.
Yeah, you do have to. Do you have enough thread to do the decorative stitch?
Right.
Do you have enough time to sit there? There was one night where I said, I'll make dinner in an hour for Carl, and at 10 o'clock at night, I'm still decorative stitching out because the thing took forever to get itself going.
Okay, now you've done something else here that I think is quite clever.
Yes.
Here, I'll take that for you.
Oh,
because you're going to need your hands.
So I also had another aha moment. These are our mini Splendor quilts. They're like a 24 by 24 inch table topper, and we have a pattern for these as well on our shop. But when I started to appliqué, one of the things that disappointed me when I started to appliqué was once I got my appliqué stitched down, everything looked great, but then I went to go do the quilting in the background, free motion machine quilting, and I am the most horrible.
Somehow I don't believe you.
I am. I will freely admit it. I am the most horrible machine quilter in the world, and I used to be so disappointed when I finished my project because I'd have this appliqué stitch and then I'd have to squiggle around.
And stop and start.
And it just drove me crazy. So one day I thought, why can't I just machine quilt the background first, then put the appliques on top, and applique and machine quilt all of that to the background. I'm not going to put these in shows. The quilt police have not shown up to my door and arrested me yet for this.
Right.
You can see it's all showing up on the back end, and that's okay with me. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. This is kind of a new revelation to me too lately.
Yeah.
It was like, why not?
Why not?
And then you don't have to use the stabilizer,
That's
correct?
right. You don't have to use stabilizer at that point. So once you've machine quilted, and you would just pack your sandwich the way you would anything else. You'd put, the backing fabric with the batting with the background fabric on top. Machine quilt the background whatever way you want. You could just do grids or squiggle or do a fancy stitch, and then put your appliques on and you're all done.
So are we basically ready to go to the machine? Because I'm going to call Ricky in.
Yes, I think so.
Okay,
I want to
okay.
show you some things that you can do on the machine.
Okay, come on in, Ricky. He's our new cameraman.
Hey, I get a new
Hi.
job.
Exactly.
So when I do a decorative stitch, and we're on the Bernina here, so it might be different on everybody else's stitch, I always do a straight line of the decorative stitch. And there's a reason for that, because I want to see what the stitch is doing. I want to see if it's off center when it starts. I want to see the cycle of the stitch.
So this is before you even get down to
testing
your work.
again.
Okay.
Testing is really important. So I've got one of my favorite decorative stitches here set up on the Bernina, and it's that tingly one.
Okay.
And I'm just going to do a straight stitch. I want to see what it does. So I'm just watching the needle. Now, don't get hypnotized by the needle. That's the other thing. And really what I'm looking at is, do I like the way the stitch is stitching? Am I going to spend, do I have enough time to watch this stitch? Am I going to get bored watching this stitch?
That is so important. That wouldn't have even crossed my mind.
And then I'm going to reach over here. I don't think I like how far apart the stitches are, so I'm just going to reduce the stitch length down to something I kind of think I might like, which is about 4.0 now. And again, I'm just watching how it stitches. I want to make sure that I can handle what it's doing.
Can you see that, Ricky, back here?
I do.
Beautiful.
And I can make it a little bit smaller if I want to in the width. And I can do all this while this is all testing. That's about probably too small for me. Now that I go back up. And we're in a big, wide millimeter stitch plate here on this machine, so that's kind of nice. These higher end machines give you that ability. Once I kind of find a stitch I like, I'm going to go do a test on my petals here.
Okay.
So that we can see how that does too. So let me just bring.
So what did you end up with?
I ended up on this particular stitch 9.0 width. That's because that's the widest it can do on this particular machine, and about 4.0 stitch length.
Okay.
And you just test until you like it. And it depends on what thread you're using too. I'm using a 40 weight Aurifil again. So if you're using something thinner like a 50 weight, you might not have the stitch so close.
Okay.
Or you might have it a little bit closer.
How am I doing?
You tell me.
All right, so here I'm on my Splendor applique. This is just a little flower petal. And so now I've determined what I like. I'm going to make sure that I'm back at the start of the cycle of the stitch. That's important.
And how do you know that on the machine?
Well, a lot of times on a computerized machine, it'll show you like a little arrow or like a little arrow off to the side in a circle, and that means you're in mid-cycle.
Okay.
So you can either put it in memory and clear the machine so you've got everything memorized, or you can just hit that arrow and it will go back to the start
Okay, I did not know that.
of the actual stitch. And so I'm going to drop my needle like I did before when I showed this to you. I want that bobbin thread up to the top again, and that's just to avoid threadness.
Right.
And again, it's important to stitch. And there's that little arrow showing up saying I'm in mid-cycle.
Okay,
so
so
I'm
what do
just
you
going
do?
to hit that, and now I'm back to
Oh,
the start.
come on.
And so
Okay.
now I put my needle down in the hole that I came up with, the bobbin. Again, that might show up. I'm going to hit the secure thread function because I want it to secure. And I'm going to drop my presser foot and I'm going to let it secure first. And this is a test. And then you can see I kind of started off center. So that's important for me to note when I go to my real applique, is that I started with the needle slightly off center.
So remember that.
So remember that
Okay.
it comes right down the center. And so I just want to see how this stitches out around this petal. So we're just going to put petal to the metal and kind of go around. Now, part of doing these practice sessions too is you want to be able to figure out how this stitch, this decorative stitch, behaves around curves. Because some some decorative stitches fan out.
Okay.
They warp out. They lose their sense of shape. Some decorative stitches look nice, but you have to slow down as you go around the curve.
What if you have to like really go around?
Like a really tight curve,
Yes,
you
yes.
have to slow down, or else that decorative stitch is going to warp out. It's going to get
Okay.
wider,
Okay.
and it's not going to look as uniform. This one, which is why it's one of my favorite decorative stitches, means I can go fast. I can just kind of slowly maneuver around this large petal shape. And you can see how pretty that's looking around that petal shape right there. Obviously,
Well, I'm going to say a lot of your designs for your patterns, you're not having to deal with super tiny stuff. You have
No.
created really
Right,
user-friendly
right.
applique shapes.
yeah, I do really large applique shapes, basic shapes, and then put this into them. And I could even come back to this petal if I wanted to and put like a straight stitch down the middle of the petal and do another decorative stitch to create like a stamen for the flower itself. But you can see what that's looking like.
Okay, so my takeaway is get out my machine and start doing stitches.
Absolutely.
Right?
All of those, you know, we
Fabulous.
have all those high-end machines and they have all those gorgeous decorative stitches to play with. And all of them have a function somewhere.
And Ricky, have you ever done the pre-quilting before yet?
I haven't, I'm going to say maybe once in my life. It wasn't my go-to, but it's a really smart thing. And I think I remember Jean Wells even taught us that many
really?
years
Really?
ago on the quilt show. She was doing some things where she actually put little quilts on top of bigger quilts.
Okay.
So we can do a lot of things.
On the
and
smaller
the,
stuff.
the quilt police don't show
They
up at the
don't
door.
show. I guarantee you, they do not show up.
Hey, what is your website again?
It is Colourwerx.com, and it's spelled, of course, European because Carl is from London. So COLOURWERX.com.
Okay.
Yeah, complete with motorcycles and everything out here in the, in Lake Travis near Austin,
So is there
Texas.
anything else, or are we done?
Well, I have something for Ricky and you that I actually made for you.
Okay.
And I just
Oh,
need
no.
to go around the
I
machine.
know. Oh
here.
no.
No,
no.
I made both of you a little mod TV.
Oh my
This is one of our
gosh.
pens.
Oh,
And
look at that.
so you guys get to choose which one you guys want.
I take
you know.
either.
Pink was, you
I want
know.
the hat.
What? Okay. Okay.
You can
Okay.
have the not hat. Thank
So
you.
those are
you.
gifts for you.
Thank
Those are
you.
awesome.
And then
oh, that's fabulous.
You brought your oldest UFO. You
I
don't know about
did.
this. Yeah.
I did. Ricky might want to see this. So I took
Oh,
a class
no.
with Ricky. I don't know if he remembers. Back a long time ago. It was about 21
the
years.
Chantel.
And it was it Caveman Quilting?
Yes, it was
the
Caveman
name
Quilting.
of the class. It is now my oldest UFO.
Okay, well,
And
let's
because
get
I've
it.
always been too
You now
scared to
have a
finish
challenge.
it.
Finish.
I know, and I want you to sign it.
Not until you finish it.
Oh,
How
no!
about that?
Ouch!
You just proved that you can do the quilting.
Ouch!
And I will promise you, I'll even pay
Okay.
for
I
the
think
postage
that's-
for you to send
Oh,
it
will
to
you?
me. I will.
Okay.
You're being poopy.
I'm not being poopy.
No.
You're going to finish this
I'm going to
quilt.
finish it now.
I love that. You can even put some of these
Look, she
appliques
even
on it.
came
I
prepared.
did.
Well, I could sign it.
Okay.
That would be
I
nice.
could. I'll
Well,
sign
let's
it. I'll sign it.
let's sign off and then we can arm wrestle
Okay,
about the
we'll
whole
do
thing.
that.
So thanks so much for watching today. So much information here, Linda. You rock.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
Thank
fun.
you
It
for
was a
having
lot
me.
of fun today. I hope you've had a good time with us today too, everyone. Thank you for being part of our quilt family. And remember, it is a new day
Every day.